But she was just sort of like, whatever.
Meh. My Ava, my great niece, she's 10 months now. She loves pesto. Loves it. Can't get enough pesto. Loves it. Yeah.
Yeah, what else? Like, what other story? She's the boss lady in this house, if you can't tell.
Looks like she's giving you a nice ear massage.
Yeah, she likes to put the finger anywhere it can go. Say hi, Counselor Goodhouse.
Hi. Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday. We're just playing Elizabeth on Zoom.
I know, I saw that.
How's the conference going?
That last meeting.
How's the conference going?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, it's been nice. Hey, Mayor. Hey, Youth Counselor. Mike, how's everything on your end? Ready. Thanks.
You said, Mike, I need to wait 1 second, did you say? Okay, thank you. All right, I will call this Tigard City Council meeting to order. City Recorder Krager, please call roll.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Youth Councilor Nog.
Here.
Councilor Goodhouse.
Wait, here.
Councilor Newton.
Here.
Council President Lube.
Here.
Councilor Shaw.
Here.
All right, I will ask everyone to join on your own in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please mute your computers, and Mr. Nollett, please put the flag up on the screen. Thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Nollett. Councilor staff, any non-agenda items?
None from us, Mr. Mayor.
All right. We'll move on to public comment. Any callers with general comments should call into the line now to get in the queue. Phone number is 503-966-4101. And follow up to previous public comment. There were no comments at the last meeting, so we do not have any follow-up. City Recorder Krager, I did not see any written public comments. Is that still accurate, or am I correct in that?
You are correct. We did not receive any written comments.
All right, we'll go to phone-in public comment. Again, the phone line to use is 503-966-4101. Mr. Nollett, are there any callers in the queue?
Mr. Mayor, at this time, there are no callers in the queue.
All right, we have no proclamations or recognitions and no consent agenda. We'll move on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is a briefing number 4, our 4th briefing on the Washington Square Regional Center Update Project. Senior Planner Shanks, and you've got a whole team with you.
Yes, I do. Well, good evening, Mayor Snyder and council members. And hello, I have actually not met the youth council member as of yet. So it's nice to kind of meet you virtually. I'm pleased to be here this evening with my team, at least a portion of my team, key members of the team. And I really appreciate you actually convening this meeting so we can give this briefing to you this evening, because we're just about to head into our legislative adoption process. So with that, just checking that you can hear me okay, because I'm going to turn to my PowerPoint. Great, perfect. And then I won't be able to see you guys. I am going to ask that you hold your questions or comments to the end of the presentation. Usually that's not what I like to do during briefings, but just because we have a team of folks and because I'm doing most of the presentation with Becky Hewitt's help, and she's the project manager on the consultant side, I just want to have the conversation with the whole team at the end. And so I'm going to try just to get to the presentation as quickly as I can without speaking too quickly. So with that, here's my presentation. Okay. I'm assuming that you all can see it unless I hear otherwise.
We can see it.
Perfect, thank you. So as Mr. Mayor was just saying, this is the fourth briefing that we've given council on the project since it started a little over a year and a half ago. And this is also the last briefing that you'll hear before I see you again in December, hopefully the middle of December, in a legislative public hearing to adopt a new comprehensive plan chapter for the Washington Square Regional Center. I do want to introduce my team. And before that, I do that, I also wanted just to point out that the reason for the Spanish translation on the slides is not just, you know, us being politically correct. It really, actually, this presentation was modeled after a truly bilingual presentation that the team and I gave to our stakeholder working group community members last week, and those there's 2 Spanish language speakers on that in that group that have advised us throughout the project. And so we've been, when we have been translating and making bilingual presentations to them so that those Spanish language speakers can fully participate and understand what's going on. So I point that out because what I've realized in working with them and with interpretation and translation services is that we collectively in CD, and for those of us that work with the public, I certainly have realized that I need to do a better job about really including Spanish language speakers as well as other language speakers, non-English Spanish speakers, whenever possible. So hopefully we're going to have some of our Spanish language speaking community members at the public hearing. I'm really encouraging them to participate. They've really enjoyed the process and are now very interested in kind of being more involved in city government. So I hope they follow through, and they've been a pleasure to work with. So as for introductions for the team that is here this evening, I'm sure you actually know all these folks, but I'm going to run through their titles and their names because I have been working very closely with all of these folks throughout the whole project. On the call with us this evening is Dave Roth, the Senior Transportation Planner for the city. And I have been coordinating closely because he is in the process of doing the Transportation System Plan update. And this project actually has transportation recommendations, so it has worked out really nicely. Lloyd Purdy, Economic Development Manager, is also on the call, and he and I have been working closely together since the very beginning, since we scoped this project, because of the essentially the number of jobs that exist in the regional center, the number of businesses and jobs. Skylar Warren, Senior Planner, is also on the call, and he's really our in-house housing expert. And so he is participating in helping us draft some of the housing recommendations. Tom McGuire, unfortunately, is on vacation, but he has been very much involved. He's the Assistant Community Development Director. And last but certainly not least, and I already mentioned her, but Becky Hewitt is also on the call, and she represents a whole consultant team. And she's the project manager on the consultant side, and she'll participate in certain very specific ways where she really is more the subject matter expert than I am. So welcome team. We actually ran through this last night with the Planning Commission. It was a great conversation. So I hope to have the same kind of conversation with the city councilors. Okay, just as a reminder that this project was really all about refining the original vision that we currently have for the regional center. And it really is about working with the community to do that and with our project partners, because the regional center is in unincorporated Washington County as well as in Beaverton. Our goal was to facilitate more housing, transportation, and business opportunities that advance our commitment to be both walkable, healthy, and inclusive. And obviously that's consistent with our strategic vision for the city. And what came out during the project is that we also really need to be mindful about balancing the community's aspirations with market realities, because we learned a lot during our development feasibility testing and our market studies. And we also want to be mindful of being able to deliver on new projects and programs. In the past, I think in this particular case with Washington Square Regional Center and the original vision, we kind of overpromised a little bit by recommending very, very big, expensive projects that we were never able to follow through on. So we wanted to be mindful of those things and balance them out. Our objectives for this evening is to just give you a really brief overview of the draft recommendations, to summarize next steps, and then to solicit your feedback at the end. And I just want to say that what we're going to hear from you tonight will go into refining the draft recommendations, and these draft recommendations will form the basis for the goals and policies in the new comprehensive plan chapter that we're drafting for the Washington Square Regional Center. So your feedback is very important. And here's the list of kind of the topic of recommendation, or the various topics of recommendations that we're going to be going over this evening. We actually organized the recommendations around the themes that we actually heard from the community in doing our outreach. And then the development of the recommendations themselves were based on not only what we learned from the community, but also what we heard from the community, but also what we learned from the various analyses that we did. And again, these recommendations will form the basis for new goals and policies to guide the future development of the regional center. I really hope you had an opportunity to look at the recommendations, the various graphics that were included as part of the staff report. You're going to be seeing those graphics again this evening, but if you did look at them, you might remember that while they were, we tried to make them as graphic and easy to understand as possible, there still was a lot of information on them. And so I apologize, I'm going to show you some slides with a lot of words, and covering just the key points. But there is a lot of information, a lot of really good information on those graphics that I hope you take the time, if you haven't already, to go back and review. Okay, so to dive in, again, we're going to kind of cover these recommendations by theme, starting with land use. And so again, this was the graphic that you got in your staff report materials, so I hope it's familiar to you. And I'm going to just kind of go over the high points, because like I said, I want to leave a lot of time for having a conversation with you all. So what this graphic, the story that it's telling, the recommendations that we're proposing for the regional center is essentially centered around that pink area. And with regard to land use, we're talking not only about land uses, but we're talking about kind of intensity of development. And so what this graphic is showing you is different intensities of development emanating outward from that center pink area. And yes, Washington Square Mall is in that center pink area, but it's not the only thing in that center pink area. We have the Lincoln Center / Lincoln Tower, as well as many other businesses on both sides of Greenberg Road that provide both lots of shopping destinations, services, regional services, as well as local services. So, but what we're proposing with our recommendations is that it's this pink area that is the most intensely developed and has the widest range of businesses of different kinds of land uses, high density housing, lots of pedestrian amenities, very walkable, and the range of stories that we're talking about is from 4 to 12 stories. And if you remember from previous briefings, this is bringing it down. You know, we've talked about right sizing the vision for this area based on market analysis, but we're bringing that down from a maximum height of 20 stories. And honestly, in the near term, we don't expect to see even 12 stories in this area, but we do expect to see like 4, 5, 6, and 7-story buildings in this area as the mall begins to redevelop, as well as other areas in that pink area. And then emanating outward from that pink area on the left-hand side, the blue area, we're facilitating that more as a mixed-use employment area with lower densities, a maximum of 7 stories going down to 1 and 2 stories. And on the right-hand side, and all kind of the yellow and gold colored areas, is a combination of both low density residential, medium density mixed use residential, and high density residential. And again, we've kind of right-sized those areas, whereas before we had a really large area of high density residential, again, that allowed up to 20-story buildings. And that's not only not what we expect to see based on market realities, but also not what the community was prepared to see. So we kind of right-sided again the scale of development in this area. And last but not least, that purple area over on the right-hand side along Hall Boulevard. In the past, this was only a footnote in our plan district for this area. So we've decided to kind of elevate it and recognize this area as the neighborhood serving kind of main street that it is. So moving on to housing, now with a lot of these topical recommendations, we're going to tell you really briefly what we heard from the community. Then we're going to tell you just really briefly what we learned from the analysis, and this is information that you've gotten in previous briefings, so that's why we're not going to cover it in great detail. And then we're going to focus on the recommendations. So for housing, this is what we heard. We definitely heard from the community in lots of different ways that they wanted more affordable housing, more housing for larger households, so larger families, and a broader range of housing types to choose from, not just apartments. And now this next slide is about displacement risk. And this is the piece about what we learned with our technical analysis. And I'm actually going to hand it off to Becky Hewitt because her team with Echo Northwest was responsible for doing this analysis, and she is much better explaining it than I. And this is probably the one piece of analysis that you haven't gotten a briefing on in the past. So Becky, can I hand it over to you?
Thanks, Susan. So as Susan mentioned, I'm Becky Hewitt. I'm a senior project manager with Echo Northwest, and I won't go into the methodology we used here to evaluate displacement risk, but it is important to know that we are focused on renters when we're thinking about displacement risk because of the way that our system provides better protection and better stability for homeowners. They're less vulnerable to changes in their housing costs that would result from changes in the market compared to renters. And renters region-wide and throughout Tigard are at relatively higher risk of displacement, particularly if they're lower income or cost burdened. It can be relatively tight for them to afford their monthly rent, and increases can become a real problem. So we think about displacement from two perspectives. One is if something might cause their rents to increase faster than they can afford, and they are forced to leave because they can't afford to remain where they are. And the other possibility being that redevelopment would force them to leave the home that they're living in. So we worry a little bit more about rent escalation for apartment buildings and a little bit more about redevelopment risk for single family homes, because it's much less likely that apartment buildings will be torn down and replaced with larger apartment buildings. But so we looked at the existing housing stock in this area, and there are apartment buildings all along Hall Boulevard, as well as in a few other parts of the area. And there are some older apartment buildings that are not, they're not regulated affordable housing. So they're what we call low cost market rate. They're comparatively affordable, but not protected in that way. And the apartment buildings in particular that are closest to the mall are the ones that are most likely to experience some sort of impact as the mall redevelops, if it becomes a more desirable place to be. Property owners might have incentives to remodel units and increase rents over time. Sometimes that can cause displacement of the existing residents. So that area, that's sort of a butterfly shape maybe. Susan and I have been trying to figure out how to describe the shape. But the top dark red area along Hall Boulevard is kind of where some of those apartment buildings are concentrated, where we might be worried about market pressure affecting displacement as the mall redevelops. And then the other kind of darker red area along Oak Street in the southern part of Hall is primarily single family homes, where there's a smaller number of renters that we're talking about that could be displaced as redevelopment occurs. That redevelopment generally is already allowed by the existing regulations. In some cases, it's already happening now. So it's not, we're not talking about hundreds of households. In that case, that's maybe a dozen or 2 dozen at most households that we're talking about that might be renting in that area and vulnerable to displacement as a result of redevelopment. And that redevelopment would tend to provide a lot more housing units than are there today. So the redevelopment of single family homes is, if it's increasing the housing supply, is a little bit less of a concern in sort of the big picture, although it can still have impacts certainly for those households. And then the rest of that area, that's kind of that shaded lighter color, there is some risk to rental housing kind of throughout this area. Again, there's a baseline relatively high level of risk to renters for displacement just in general. And so changes to this area over time, over a longer period of time, could increase displacement risk here more generally. But the real area of focus, if the city is going to try to target areas to prevent displacement, would be kind of the apartment buildings closest to the mall that are older and are not regulated affordable housing.
Thank you so much, Becky. And Becky is going to stay on the call, so if you have questions for her about displacement risk at the end of the presentation, she will be here to answer them. So thank you, Becky. So as for housing recommendations, and I do want to kind of bring in a data point that we shared a long time ago that you might not remember, but this area in particular, actually on this map, it is the hatched area that's on both sides of Greenberg Road and surrounded by Hall Boulevard. This area actually contains more renters than is typical for Tigard as a whole. So Tigard as a whole has about a mix of 40% renters to 60% homeowners, but the reverse is true for this area. This area has more like 60% renters and 40% homeowners. So it just kind of highlights what Becky was saying about risk, that there is more risk for renters in general, and there are more renters in this area. So it should be no surprise to you that our housing recommendations do talk about helping to support rental housing stability and those households who are renters, and specifically to actually target our anti-displacement programs that are identified in our affordable housing plan to these priority areas. And so kind of that same area that you saw on the previous map, this kind of butterfly dog bone area. Yeah, still not really a great description, but anyway, that area right up here is the same area in here that we're saying, you know, hopefully as the city implements the affordable housing plan or the additional strategies in the affordable housing plan, that one of the areas that it focuses its anti-displacement efforts is in this area based on the analysis that Echo Northwest has done. And then also similar to what Becky said about other apartment buildings along Hall Boulevard, there are hundreds of households in the range of like, I want to say 600 households that live in apartment buildings along this other stretch of Hall Boulevard. And there's, I believe, 1 or maybe 2 affordable housing developments, but the rest of them are older, unregulated, like market rate affordable housing. And so this is the area that we've identified that is kind of more of a longer term anti-displacement priority area. And then kind of stepping back out and away from just anti-displacement and focusing just on housing in general, I want to focus your attention on the left side of the screen, because what this graphic is showing us, in addition to those anti-displacement priority areas, is kind of where we're recommending that housing is allowed and in what way. And this is similar, but not quite what we currently have going on in the area. So just to run through this really briefly, the hatched area, which is like the vast majority of this area, we're recommending that housing be allowed both by itself as well as in a mixed use configuration. So on the upper floors above, businesses. The purple area on the other side of Highway 217, as well as along Hall Boulevard, housing would be allowed, but only on upper floors above businesses, because we do really want to protect these areas for employment, for jobs, for those business uses that are so critical to our economic development programs. And then lastly, this one little area that's kind of in this beigey color, that only housing would be allowed by itself in those locations. So no kind of mixed use commercial developments, just housing, because that is the lower density residential area currently. So in addition to allowing housing everywhere, but in different kinds of configurations and supporting rental housing stability, we are also recommending to support the development of more affordable housing with different strategies. Some of these strategies we are already doing, which is great, like exempting affordable housing projects from certain SDCs or system development charges. But some of these are some new ideas, like helping to fund affordable housing projects with the development fees that are generated by private development in the area, kind of proportional to the private investment that we expect in this area. And lastly, we do have some regulatory barriers that prevent the full range of housing types that we want to see here. And so we want to remove those barriers to the development of a range of housing types, as well as potentially developing a revolving loan fund for middle housing development. And again, I think that's something that's currently in our affordable housing plan. So that was housing. And moving on to business development, or as sometimes, as Lloyd will talk about it, Lloyd Purdy, he'll talk about this as economic development, but this is really more how the community talks about it. So what we heard from the community was that they wanted to see more business diversity and commercial vitality. There's a lot of vacant buildings in the area, and that was even true before COVID, and COVID has not helped that situation. They certainly recognize that the mall parking lots take up a lot of space, and a lot more things can fit onto those parking lots. They definitely talked about keeping the scale of the neighborhood businesses on Hall Boulevard kind of the same, and to really focus that more intense development over, around the mall and on either side of Greenberg, but to keep Hall kind of that neighborhood serving low scale development. And lastly, they certainly wanted to see more multicultural shopping and dining options. We really sought hard to have a stakeholder working group that was composed of diverse community members that really reflected the diversity of this community, and many people, both from the Spanish language community as well as from the Somali community, and we had several members participate from the Somali community, that's what they were really hoping to see here. In terms of, so that's what we heard from the community. And in terms of what we learned, and this is kind of a slide that summarizes at kind of in a one-stop shopping way. It summarizes the different analyses that Becky's Echo Northwest team did. And essentially what this slide is showing is that different areas have different opportunities. And And this should be no surprise. The regional center is very large, and it's also bisected by Highway 217. So there's different opportunities in these different areas, and the market's going to support different things in these different areas. And so that's what those colored boxes are showing us. And as for the gray box down in the lower left-hand corner, what we learned about the challenges for development, and we learned this through doing a code audit and doing some development feasibility studies, is that a lot of the challenges for development are regulatory nature. They come from what we have in our current development code. But not all of them. There's certainly definitely some market challenges. You know, the retail sector is changing. And changing even more so because of COVID. But there are a lot of regulatory barriers that are challenges, and that's something that we can do something about. And Becky, I just want to ask you, is there anything that you would add to focus on under opportunities and challenges?
No, I think you summarized this well. I think this it informs both the economic development recommendations and the land use recommendations that Susan presented earlier, and was really one of the pieces that informed the right sizing conversation and kind of understanding what the realistic opportunities are to sort of move the area forward without trying to without trying to sort of leapfrog over what's possible today.
Thank you, Becky. That's helpful to know. So moving on to our business recommendations, a fair number of the ones listed here are actually all regulatory in nature. So again, things that we have more control over in terms of changing our code. For example, under supporting mall redevelopment, we can change our code to allow buildings at a variety of heights, including single-story buildings. We can change our code to allow a broader range of businesses that are a good fit in a walkable and urban environment. And we can certainly change our code to reduce parking requirements, because right now, by the way, the mall has far too many spaces. It's what we call being overparked. So those are things that we can actually do that are regulatory in nature. The same is true for kind of the recommendations for fostering economic growth, as well as incentivizing ground floor commercial uses below housing. As for the things that are truly kind of economic development, and in Lloyd Purdy and his team's wheelhouse, we are proposing some new recommendations, although definitely in consultation with Lloyd and his team, and also proposing to continue doing some things that we're already doing. So for example, under facilitating business diversity, one of the recommendations is to continue to partner with nonprofit and multicultural business partners to support women and minority-owned businesses. So that's something we're already doing, which is great. But what we're also thinking about doing, when I say we, I mean Lloyd and his team, is exploring interest in a business incubation program to grow the local labor and supply chain, as well as cultivating a variety of resources for small businesses. What we're also thinking about doing over here on the Hall Boulevard side is approaching those business operators and property owners and seeing if they're interested in perhaps pursuing an Oregon Main Street designation, because that might open up some funding for them through the state. So we are looking at things to do that are very specific to this area, as well as continuing some citywide programs and initiatives that we have going on right now. And Becky, anything you can think to add here?
On the supporting the mall redevelopment, this is less about the business, but is specific to the mall. So I'll call it out here that there's also the possibility of using incentives to encourage vertical mixed-use development, so that as they build housing into some of their phases, there might be ground floor commercial opportunities as well. So that's something that the mall redevelopment kind of has opportunities to integrate the housing and commercial uses together, and get both of them into a more compact space than there is right now.
Yeah, thank you. And that actually is consistent with that housing recommendation slide where we want to see both housing by itself and housing in a mixed use kind of environment and more vertical mixed use environment. So that's very much consistent with that. Thank you. The transportation, what we heard, no surprise, people raised some traffic issues, specifically speeding along 90th Avenue that is partly in the city, but also in Washington County, and congestion on Greenberg Road, which is currently a county facility. Although definitely one of the recommendations, one of the key recommendations is to continue talking with them about the possibility of jurisdictional transfer. And then what we heard loud and clear is that people really want to see better walking and biking facilities. And, you know, this is really consistent with our aspiration to be much more inclusive and healthy and equitable, because it is generally lower income households that either can't afford to maintain a car, or only can have one for a family, and so not everybody can use that, you know, one vehicle at all time, and so people are more needing to rely on transit in this area, and both for recreation and transportation purposes, and for safety reasons. Like we are missing so many sidewalk and bike lanes on major streets that people feel really unsafe walking and riding in this area, particularly on major streets like Greenberg Road and Hall Boulevard. And there's a lack of crossing on these major streets, which doesn't help. So that prevents people from getting to parks, from getting to services, from getting to the bus, from going to the stores, getting to Metzger Elementary School, all of those kinds of things. They definitely called out more than once the lack of lighting, especially on transit streets like Greenberg Road. And this is particularly true because of the historic cemetery along Greenberg Road that doesn't have any bike or sidewalk facilities, and also very limited lighting. And there are bus stops along that frontage, which is really just very subpar. And of course, people talked about wanting a safe and easy way across Highway 217, because that is a major barrier in this area. This slide just briefly summarizes, graphically summarizes opportunities and challenges for transportation in the area. The red boxes really call out the challenges, and the green boxes call out those opportunities. And again, Greenberg Road is a major kind of barrier, as is Hall Boulevard, because these are high volume, higher speed streets with very few crossings, and they have a lot of sidewalk gaps and bike lane gaps that make walking and biking very uncomfortable, if not unsafe. Also 217, you know, obviously is a major barrier, as are the railroad tracks, as is Fano Creek. Even though that's a lovely recreational amenity because of the trail, it still, you know, ends up being a barrier in some respects. So in terms of our recommendations, I just want to orient you briefly to this slide. On the left-hand side, we have our recommendations for 5 priority projects. And then in addition to that, on the right-hand side, we have a number of other projects. We really strove in this instance to recommend projects that we really thought were really important and really elevated the need for better ped and bike facilities in this area, given the kinds of households that live in this area, that they generally tend to be lower income. And so they're on foot and on bikes and using transit a lot more. So ped bike improvements are just pretty critical. And they're just also really lacking in this area, given the fact that this is a regional center and a lot of people work here and a lot of people shop here. So it should be no surprise that our number 1 priority projects is to actually improve Greenberg Road. And we actually had the consultant team do a whole design study of Greenberg Road to see how we could fit basically a complete street with bike and ped facilities along this segment. And we've been talking to the county about that, and they're very positive and receptive. The number 2 project is really about making the best of one of the few crossings of Highway 217 and improving that for peds and bikes. Number 3 is really looking at, you know, yes, we have this one crossing of Highway 217 at Greenberg, but, you know, for pedestrians and cyclists who don't necessarily feel that comfortable in heavy traffic, especially going through an interchange. We're really looking at we want to study the feasibility of a separate ped bike crossing at 95th Avenue or Highway 217, with looking at these different alternative routes to get people both across Highway 217, but also to get people over to Fano Creek Trail. Because this area, as you'll see in one of the future slides, is really lacking in recreation opportunities and park access. So this would accomplish many things. Right here, this is the site of the future Bagan Park. And then, of course, over here is Fano Creek Trail, as well as the Tigard Heritage Trail. So we have a current CIP project to study this area for improving the crazy intersection that occurs with Tiedemann, North Dakota, and Greenberg, and also as a way to improve people, kind of moving through this area, people moving, across 217, because this pink area right here actually shows the attendance boundary for Metzger Elementary School, which is in the middle of this area. But we have students, going to Metzger Elementary School over here. Are they probably walking across Greenberg? I kind of doubt it. So we really want to improve this area and access across Highway 217 for a number of reasons. We also, one of our priorities is to look at improving access to Metzger Park, but also across Hall Boulevard because of the lack of crossings along Hall Boulevard. So Hall Boulevard is another major barrier. And lastly, to complete the ped bike facilities on Oak Street as a way to move people east-west through this area. Becky, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, nothing on the transportation side. Thanks, Susan.
So what we heard about parks and green space is that people said we need more of them. There's a lot of asphalt in the form of parking lots out here. And there's actually very few parks and green spaces out here. And here's a list of things that we heard from folks. And then what we realized from analyzing this area is that because this area has been so developed for so long, there's very little vacant land. So there's very little opportunity to basically to get more park space, more public park space. So what we're recommending, that's kind of shown here on the left-hand side with the green circles, is that we want to, wherever possible, partner with private property owners, partner with the school district, to leverage any opportunity for creating green space and open space for the public. So just to give you an example, we can actually tweak our regulations to both either require or at least incentivize that as the mall redevelops, it includes public outdoor space as part of their redevelopment. Similarly, in looking at doing a stormwater retrofit project and working with private property owners, that we can maybe actually leverage those stormwater facilities for public open space as well, for some passive lookouts, or perhaps for like kind of a nature trail along the edge. So we want to kind of just seize the opportunity wherever we can in partnership with private property owners. But what we also realized in looking at this area is that with the new future parks that are planned over here on Steve Street, which is on the east side of Hall Boulevard, as well as Bagan Park, which is south of 217, with Metzger Park over here in this corner, Steve Street Park here, and Bagan Park here, there are actually parks in the area. It's just that access to those parks is the problem. And so our recommendations over here on the right-hand side are really about improving access to those parks. And that was talked about a lot on the transportation recommendation slide. And then lastly, this big dashed line through the area is about providing people with a loop route through the area, using quiet streets and really connecting them to Fano Creek Trail. And you'll see that on the next slide. And we're still refining this concept, but just to share it with you now, that there was a previous loop route recommended by the original plan, but it never happened. And honestly, it was determined pretty much to be infeasible after talking with Beaverton and THPRD and Washington County. None of them felt it was a priority. It involved multiple bridges over Highway 217, and just realistically, we knew it was never going to happen. So what we did instead is focus on, well, what can we offer the community as a way to help them experience their neighborhood, connect them to parks in their neighborhood, to nature in their neighborhoods. And so this is a route that shows a loop of about 9 miles. The dashed line represents the route along kind of quieter streets, of course, except along this area over here along Greenberg, not so quiet right now, but that's where those alternative routes over 217 would be really beneficial. But this dashed line is the kind of the quiet streets route, and then the solid line is actually Fano Creek Trail through Beaverton and through Tigard. So the most of this route is on Fano Creek Trail. And just as an FYI, the city attorney and I ran this loop to test it out, and we had some other staff members walk it and bike it. And I gotta say, it was lovely. Florence Point Park, even though it's not in the city, if you haven't been there, it was a lovely little find. So I encourage you to maybe go and check it out. So really close to the end of our presentation, just want to briefly share with you our next steps. We're kind of getting close to the end of 2021. We have some public hearings scheduled, planning to go to the Planning Commission in the middle of November, and then coming to you all in the middle of December to have you consider adopting the project's recommendations, as they will be reflected in a new comprehensive plan chapter with very specific goals and policies based on what you heard tonight for land use, business development, housing, transportation, parks, and open space. And then that would be followed approximately 6 months later in 2022 by public hearings to implement those new policies through the adoption of new zoning in the area, as well as new development standards to reflect those new policies. And then, of course, after that, 2023 and beyond, we're looking at project construction and program development to, kind of hopefully work on completing some of those needed public improvements, seeing new housing and commercial buildings come online, and developing new programs such as business assistance or anti-displacement programs. So that kind of sums up our recommendations as they currently stand. And really looking forward to your feedback and questions. And like I said, we have the whole team here. And they have a lot more deeper knowledge about certain things. So I hope you take advantage of that. And with that, I would like to open it back up to you, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Well, Susan, thank you for taking some very complex topics and making them as easy to understand as possible and how they all tie together. So thank you. Thank you for that. And I will start us off with a question or two about when I'm looking at these maps, it occurs to me that some of it, certainly parts of Hall Boulevard, I know for sure, are not even in the city. And Metzger Park's not in the city either. I don't think that's a city park. Can you comment on what the kind of the implications are of that? I don't think it really changes our planning, but does that have an impact? I mean, there's a good, like the area of Hall Boulevard that you said, I think that you were indicating maybe could be designated as a main street. I don't even think both sides of that street or any of the street or even in Tigard in some of those portions. So can you just comment on that and how that may overall play into this?
Absolutely. That is a great question. I'm going to answer part of it, and then Dave, if I think I see Dave is on the call, I'll hand it off to have him answer another part of it. You're absolutely correct. Some of these areas are not within the city's jurisdiction now. However, they are in our planning service area, and we actually are required to plan for these areas. And our planning service area goes roughly up to Taylor's Ferry Road in the north. And so what we're proposing here, which is actually what we did 20 years ago when we changed the zoning 20 years ago to reflect the mixed use development aspirations for this area, is that even though we didn't have, even though many of the properties, or not all these properties are currently in the city's jurisdiction, as they annex over time, this provides direction, very clear direction to what zone they would be when they voluntarily annex to the city. So we kind of call it future zoning. So this only happens if and when those properties annex to the city. So we can lay out our vision. We've certainly been coordinating very closely with Washington County. I was just talking to their long-range planning department and assuring them that we're not rezoning anything in their jurisdiction. However, it is basically setting the table for a future vision for this area that's consistent. Because honestly, right now, zoning-wise, this area is a patchwork quilt. How's that for saying it very nicely? There's literally like 15 different zones in this area along Hall Boulevard in particular. And when I was talking with the county, they don't even understand why it's such a patchwork quilt. So this would provide a future direction for this area that also simplifies and clarifies kind of the vision for this area as properties annex. So that's my answer to it. But I want to like actually have Dave pitch in his answer with regard to like Hall Boulevard. Although I guess that's more about the transportation piece. Never mind. Actually, I won't have Dave comment yet. I was going to ask him to maybe comment on jurisdictional transfer to Hall Boulevard, but it doesn't necessarily relate as much to the land use piece of it. So did that answer your question?
And that's not in that area either, I don't think. At least not as it's been proposed, right?
Correct. However, just so you know, there is an ODOT survey right now to fund a Safe Routes to School project on Hall Boulevard in this area, in this exact area between Metzger Park and then to the south. So I encourage you to take that survey if you haven't already.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go to other members of the council who would like to ask questions or make comments. Councillor Shaw.
Right, thank you, Mayor. Quick question, and thank you so much for the presentation. I love the graphics. They're very colorful and very descriptive. There was one in particular, and that was the business development opportunities and challenges, and in particular around the mall. It was the second bullet, and I just wasn't sure. It said new of space CE buildings. I was wondering if you could clarify what that is.
You know, that's funny. I just happened to catch that on that slide. An F is missing, new office.
Oh. Ah, okay.
I don't know, like I don't know how that happened in converting it to PDF but I just noticed that myself. So yeah, sorry about that.
No, it looked like there was, and that's a great opportunity to put offices there. So just wanted to make sure it was on the same page. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, Councillor Goodhouse.
Yes, thank you. One question I was having when we were talking about the height changes and so forth. Have we checked? I presume so, but with Washington Square and their future plans and all that, as far as changing those, so that fits in, and there's no one along them or any other potential developments going on in the future that would even consider that.
That is correct. We've been working really closely with the mall property owners, and as I think I said that. Even though we're reducing the height from 20 stories down to 12, we actually still don't even expect to see 12 in the near future. The Sears redevelopment, I believe the tallest building there is 5 or 6. And Jacob Knutson from the mall described to me their next phase of redevelopment, even though it's not proceeding yet. But even in that second phase, which is more around the JCPenney area in the north, would have like 5, 6, 7-story buildings. So this would not interfere with any of their future plans.
Okay, so no more Lincoln Towers in the future?
No, yeah, that building was built 40 years ago, and it's still the tallest building in Washington County.
And Susan, it's not even 20. I mean, it's not close to 20, right? Isn't it? Isn't it
It's
only 12? 14?
It's actually, no, I think it is 12 because we also wanted to go up to 12, so we didn't make it non-conforming.
Yeah, so if that gives you an idea, Councilor Goodhouse, like it's 12 stories and there's nothing else anywhere in Washington County that's even probably remotely close to that.
Thank you.
Councilor Goodhouse, anything further? No. Council President Lube.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting, just to continue to get these updates as we're looking at this region, this area just in a holistic kind of way. I really appreciate us being able to look at these different slides and look at these different aspects. And I found, the displacement risk really interesting because we talk about, as we redevelop areas, it ends up sort of kicking people out who have been there for a long time and bringing in these new fresh areas. And I'm really concerned with, the having 60% being renters and just obviously having this a really important place for our Tigard community members. I have some practical questions just around the anti-displacement measures for the future that I'll ask on the side, just that practical part of me. And we don't need to get into the weeds here, but I just want to emphasize that I think it's really important, and I appreciate that we're looking forward at this and trying to make sure that everyone can sort of stay in the area and stay, where they have established their families or their homes. I did have a question as you were going through. You referred to the mall as overparked, and I was just curious sort of what qualifies it as overparked and how did we get to that? Because I know parking was sort of referenced in changing our parking standards in this area.
Yeah, so so essentially we have standards for different uses in terms of how much parking our code requires, which is kind of based on different data points, I think even across the country. And so even by those standards, so we have minimum maximum parking standards for all different kinds of uses. And even within those minimum maximum standards, the mall has well above the maximum. And then if you even talk to the mall property owner themselves, they know that they're overparked, like not all their parking spaces are utilized. Perhaps, you get the closest on, the day before Christmas kind of thing, but that's not necessarily the best metric to use for an area like this. So I'm going to just check in with Becky to see if she had, because her team did the kind of development feasibility and code audit piece to see if she has anything else to add.
No, I think what Susan said in terms of it being overparked is relative to current standards right now, but I think it's also just, relative to kind of current parking demand and what the mall perceives that they need. And so I think there are opportunities for some of the surface parking areas potentially to be freed up for redevelopment. So I think they, at the time that the mall was built, I think there was probably a higher requirement for parking and also sort of more perceived need to make sure that even on the day before Christmas that everyone could park, and there would still be extra spaces. You wouldn't have to circle. So I think the priorities have shifted a little bit now in terms of how much parking even places like malls want to have relative to having reasons for people to come. They want to have more things for people to come to, even if they have a few less parking spaces for them to park in. And that helps keep their businesses vibrant and helps keep the area vibrant.
Well, and I think it piggybacks also having better transportation in the area to ensure that people don't have to use their cars to get there. That's looking at it again holistically and being able to say reducing the amount of parking spaces, being better able to utilize the land that's there and have more offerings, but have different ways that people can get there to not always have to use their cars is really important too. Thank you. No other questions.
All right, Councillor Newton and then Youth Councillor Nog.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I wanted to echo Council President Lube's comments about the displacement. I won't reiterate them now, but I had the same interest there. And then I was glad to see it's, with the fourth update we've had, it was great to see the land use adjusted based on the market analysis and what the folks in the area think would be valuable. I was there when we did the Washington Square plan 20 years ago, and maybe we should have done that then. So it was great to see the evolution and trying to be a little bit more realistic about what we're going to see out there. So glad to see that. I did have one comment about transportation and mass transit. Having grown up in Garden Home, not too far from there, sometimes it was okay to walk. I know it's not going to be Washington Square, but sometimes a bus, you needed to take mass transit. My mom didn't drive, so she did both. So I think there's the importance for mass transit for the people that are going to be living in the area and need to get to mass transit to get to their services or jobs, but also if it's going to be a regional center, to make sure that's a really viable option for people if we're not going to discourage to a degree auto cars. So I didn't hear a lot about that. I'm sure that's probably in the works, but getting to the mall area is a little bit inconsistent depending on the day and time of day. So I'm hoping as we move forward, we can give walking, biking, mass transit, autos, sort of equal review to make sure we've got the right mix. So I guess that would be my comment. Thanks.
Yeah, that is a great thing that you've pointed out that I didn't necessarily mention, but it is a very important component to making this place function well and function better without the need for all the vehicular travel to the area. And so one of the things that we actually did, and we did it earlier on, is we had a series of meetings with TriMet and with the mall property owner, because right now the Washington Square Transit Center, which does provide great, it serves many different bus routes going east-west and into downtown Portland and out to the west, but also buses that then come down into Tigard and through the neighborhoods. And so we had some really good conversations with them about, kind of trying to create some common ground for both parties, because right now the TriMet does not own the land that the transit center is on, and they just have a lease with the mall to remain there. And both parties kind of have aspirations for, it to be better, but they're kind of both saying like, but you should improve it. But we ended up having really productive conversations, and they actually, it was really great to hear that the mall doesn't want to kick TriMet out, recognizes the value of having good transit service to their location. And we have actually developed, and this will be more fully shared in the actual language, but we have actually developed kind of future, like agreements about the future of transit in this area, that it maybe in the future, it's not going to be a concentrated transit center in the middle of a sea of parking, that'll be more integrated and be supported by transit-oriented development. So you'll, instead of it being in the middle of a sea of parking, you'll actually just be on a street surrounded by buildings, kind of like, obviously not the scale of downtown Portland, but it'll be more incorporated into the development rather than this island of transit over here and then all the development over here. And the mall was very much in agreement with that. TriMet is very much in agreement with that. But the development needs to precede the actual, those kinds of changes. So there is, I think, some really some good foundational work that we did with both parties. Because transit is really key, both for serving this area, but for also serving, the greater community in and around this area, both for the people that work there, not just at the mall, this whole area, the people that work there, people that are living here, and like I said, a lot of the residents who are using transit here for many different reasons. So I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said.
Thanks for that. I'll look forward to more details as the area develops. So thanks.
Youth Councilor Nod, or did you get your question answered? I see your hand down. I don't know what that means at this point.
Yeah, Councilor Newton actually asked the question I was thinking about regarding public transit, but since I do have the opportunity to talk, I guess I will ask about the green spaces, because more outdoor spaces will never be a bad thing in my opinion. And I was wondering if, what that would look like in Washington Square Mall or the surrounding area, and if maybe there could be like a community garden of some sort. Just what are the thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, it's so true. This area and certainly the community um, mentioned this many times that they they want and need places to be out in the world that feel lovely and comfortable and where they can bring their children, and whether that's a trail or just an open space or just a leafy green like a tree lined street, that they really wanted to see more green spaces, open spaces, public spaces to be out in community. And obviously COVID highlighted that to the nth degree. Um, and so I don't know if you're familiar with the mall's first redevelopment proposal that actually kind of got waylaid or delayed because of COVID. But in the southern part of the mall area where they are planning to redevelop the Sears building, as part of that, they're actually putting in a kind of pedestrian only outdoor plaza slash a little bit of green space, like a little lawn area, but like kind of more of an urban style plaza area. And so they're also recognizing the need to change the whole kind of format of the mall instead of having being like inward focused inside a building, that they need to create these outdoor spaces. Like that's what they need to do in addition to many other kinds of changes. And so they're beginning to do that. And so that's just an example of we need to think about ways to both partner, but also work with private property owners or even regulate private property owners when they're doing certain kinds of redevelopment to get something for the public out of it that will help enrich those folks' lives that live and work in the area. So we're going to be just seizing whatever opportunity we can, whether it's through retrofitting stormwater facilities, the ones that are above ground that naturally provide green areas, but they also have a functional purpose. To working with the mall, we want to approach the private property owner of the big wetland area. That we know that the previous property owner recently died, and so and he was not amenable to working with the city in that regard, but maybe his heirs will be amenable to working with the city to restore that area and perhaps provide some, kind of green space for the public that makes sense, given that it's a wetland area. So we've identified those opportunities. They're not guarantees; they are opportunities, and we need to follow through.
All right, Councillor Shaw.
Looks like Becky may have wanted to add something to that. I would give you opportunity, Becky, and then I can ask my question.
Thank you, Councilor Shaw. I just wanted to note, because I'm not sure if at least all of the community members are aware of the future parks that are coming to the area as well and what's going to be in them. And so, Susan, I think, I don't know about Steve Park, but Bagan Park will have a community garden in it, right? So I think some of the parks that are not there yet, but that are in process, will also kind of expand some of the opportunities. And again, making it easier for people to get to them so that it feels like they're part of the neighborhood as opposed to feeling like they're way over there across the highway. But I know that they don't exist yet, so I'm not sure if everyone is aware of what will be in them. Thank you, Councilor Shaw.
Certainly. This triggered thought, we were talking about displacement, and I'm great it's been highlighted and recognized. And we've also talked about overparked, and we know we have a growing houselessness issue within the city and the surrounding communities. And I wonder if there's been opportunities to discuss if there could potentially be wraparound services or even transitional housing in that area that would meet the needs of these individuals. And again, not something that needs to be answered tonight, but and it's been a growing problem, so it may not have been explored earlier, but just something to plant the seed if it hasn't.
Yeah, so that's a great comment and question. Rachel Duke, she's the Executive Director of Community Partners for Affordable Housing. She was one of our stakeholder working group members and participated throughout. And they actually, we invited Community Partners for Affordable Housing to be on the stakeholder group because they do operate existing affordable housing developments in the area. And they are also now developing for example, another housing development in the Triangle that will have wraparound services. So Rachel now is very aware of, what we're hoping for the regional center, the different things that we're going to change from a policy perspective, from a code amendment perspective, hopefully even from a funding perspective, because one of the recommendations will be highlighting, the fact that this area, unlike our town center, does not have a dedicated funding source. So there was that one recommendation that I highlighted that is about kind of capturing some of the private investment that's going to be happening in this area and capturing the fees like the CET, the construction excise tax that private development would be paying into, the SDCs that private development would be paying, and kind of flagging and or just reviewing to say, hey, like so much private investment is happening in this area. Let's look at the fees generated by that private investment, just proportionally speaking, and invest that in the area. And so because the CET was developed specifically to support our housing initiatives, that is one opportunity that we may be able to partner with our agencies like SEPA to help them create more affordable housing opportunities in this area with those wraparound services. So yeah, there's many different parts to that, and many different ways, and other partners we can work with, like REACH. But certainly, the difficulty is that there's just very little vacant land. And so that's always, it is just a challenge, which is the Tigard was not plagued by that same challenge. It had a lot of vacant land. So yeah, it's definitely part of our recommendations is to focus on, although I guess specifically we haven't talked about affordable housing with wraparound services. So I guess thank you for that note that we can include that also as part of the bigger recommendation. And how is it? Sorry, Skylar Warren, I think is still on the call. Skylar, would you like to add anything there?
I think you pretty well summed it up, Susan. I think the geocapture is what we're kind of calling it. The geocapture idea for CET is also something that we've been exploring as a way to support affordable housing development in River Terrace. So this is something that definitely we're looking closely at. And with regard to the wraparound services, there's, of course, the opportunity to tap into the SHS measure funds and leverage even more services with the city investment. So certainly a lot of opportunities out there for us to provide not just housing supports, but really the full range of supports that are needed in the community right now.
All right, Councillor Goodhouse, you had another question or comment?
I just had to do a closing comment to be nostalgic, but is there any plans to bring back the Hydrotubes or the water park to Washington Square? I'm dating myself, so I don't know if many remember that or realize that, but every time I say that, people don't realize there was Hydrotubes and a water park there on Washington Square, kind of below in the lower part by Target. So
yeah, and the Embassy Suites, right?
No, it was the lower parking lot where the parking structure is. So if you take that road, the lower part below Embassy Suites.
Fascinating.
Sounds like that's not part of the plan, Councillor Goodhouse.
Sorry, but that sounds great. I know that Tigard wants a water feature, but I think that's happening at Universal Plaza.
All right.
Yeah, that might take a real water feature.
Thank you, team. Appreciate it. Council, thanks for all the great comments and questions. I think that's really informative, and I would encourage community members that are more interested to really review the detailed information that the staff provided in the staff report and the supplemental materials. Really informative and great information. And looks like the council and the city have a lot more work to do on this to move towards enacting much of it. So I look forward to that. And Susan, do you have anything further that you needed to cover on this?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and please reach out if you have any questions, comments, and looking forward to bring you a new set of goals and policies. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And we'll move on the agenda. We have no non-agenda items. City Manager Reimer, you have an administrative report?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. Well, good evening again, Mayor, councilors, my teammates, and community members. I want to start by echoing the comments of many of you. Thanks to Susan and Becky and many of our teammates for this much needed and important work for the Washington Square area. So great to see it getting to this point. And as the mayor said at the end there, there's gonna be a lot of work ahead of us in terms of policy adoption and finding ways to really advance the plans. But thank you to the team for getting us to this point. As many of you know, the ICMA conference is in town. Portland's hosting it. We have about 3,000 colleagues of ours visiting our great area, and 7 of us attended as well. So thanks to all my teammates for doing that. And also want to say thanks to Kathy, Kent, and Eduardo for participating in a session on best practices for outreach and engagement. So thanks to the 3 of them for participating and sharing what we're doing here with others around the country. Just a few updates tonight, above and beyond that. First is we have several new diverse books at the library. And as we've been doing lately, we like to read quotes or information that we get. So I'd like to read this one quickly about it. This individual said, "I don't know who put the books up on display, but I'm so appreciative of all the diversity. There weren't any books like this when I was growing up. My child is so happy to have books with characters that look like her. The diverse collection and displays advance, our strategic plan, as well as our community promise and many other things. It's really about what we're about, right? And so it's just nice to see the community members recognizing that, appreciating it, and utilizing our materials at the library. So thanks to Halsa and the team for doing that. Also at the library, we're having a class coming up on learning how to streamline your job search. That's going to be on October 14th at 6 p.m. And so individuals can register for that program. And then my last thing for the evening is it's fall, as we all know, as you can tell by the weather and the trees and the leaves. And so it's our 19th annual leaf disposal and food drive is coming up. And so I know that's always a popular thing. I was happy to hear that we had it. It was like, great. It's a perfect thing. So first one starts on Saturday, November 6th at Cook Park from 9 to 3. Individuals can bring loose leaves or in paper or plastic. If they do bring it in plastic bags, we're just going to ask that they dump the leaves and take the plastic bags with them. It's free, but we also recommend the food donation, non-perishable goods that will go to our local food supplies that we need. And so always popular, I know, in communities. And so we will run that in 4 Saturdays from November 6th, the 20th, December 4th, and December 11th. And so we'll keep advertising this through social media and other ways to make sure the community takes advantage of this great program. And that concludes my remarks. Have a great evening.
All right, thank you, City Manager Reimer. I don't believe we have an executive session scheduled. And so is there a motion for adjournment?
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second
that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. City Recorder, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Councilor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Councilor Newton,
Yes.
Council President Lube,
Yes.
Councilor Shaw.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Good night, Tigard.
Night, Tigard.
Good night.